How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kufnun Tes, Daf 159 of Masechta BavaBasra. However, this Daf is awesome for a bunch of reasons. It is the last Daf of Perek Mishames, the last Daf of the 9th Perek of Masechta BavaBasra, the last Daf of the second to last Perek of all of Nizikin, comprised of the 30 prakim of Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, BavaBasra. This is an awesome daf because it's an intense daf. We're gonna get into things over here. This could be an hour. This could for sure be an hour. So this is gonna be a great one. So here we go. All right. We're going to start in Daf Kuf Nun Ches Amud Beis at the two dots, about 5 or so lines from the bottom. So the Mishnah was talking about a scenario where a house tragically collapsed on a mother and son. We said in that case everybody agrees that that the heirs would split the estate, and all right. Now, Rabbi Akiva though had maintained that the property stays where it in its chazaka. So to which Ben Azai responded to Rabbi Akiva, it's sad enough that we have machlokes in general between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, that there's machlokes in the other scenarios of the house collapsing. Here the Tana Kama said there was takano machlokas. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that the estate is divided. Why, Rabbi Akiva, why are you saying that there's a machlokas here? It's sad enough that we have machlokas in general. We thought we had a place of agreement, and you're saying that there's a machlokas too. So now says the Gemara, Reb Simlai Ada Amra, says Reb Simlai that this indicates Ben Azai Tamur Chover Rabbi Akiva Ava. That Ben Azai was a student, but also a contemporary, a chover, a friend, a Talmud chover. That Ben Azai was Talmud chover Rabbi Akiva de Ka'amale Shebasa. He spoke to him in a very casual manner. That you came, right? What does he say? He says, I'm in the Mishnah. Amala Ben Azai al Chalukan on Mitztarin. We're sad enough about the fact that there's machlokas. But over here they were in agreement, according to the Tanakama. Elishabasa, but you came, that even here where they were in agreement, you came to say that it's machlokas shabasa, that you came. Right? It's like a very, it's not a way that you would speak to your Rebbe, that you came. So therefore it indicates that they were actually also contemporaries. Wow. Azoi. Shalchu mitam. Here we go, Chevin. Now here, you know what? I think I'm going to roll up my sleeves for this one. I think I'm going to roll this. I think that this daf and these upcoming sugyas deserve rolling up the sleeves. Okay, that's one. We'll just do a quick roll. And then, okay, that's two. So this scenario that the Gemara discusses is a scenario where a son, let's call him Ruvain, borrowed money from Shimon. Shimon is not Ruvain's brother. Shimon is just a guy named Shimon. So Ruvain borrows $1,000 from Shimon. Okay, Shimon says, I want a guarantee that, if you don't pay me back, I'll be able to collect from property. Ruvain is Meshabed, his father Yaakov's property, to the loan. So if Ruvain defaults on the loan, Shimon, who is not his brother, can collect from Ruvain's father, Yaakov. Okay. Now I guess I'll just explain like the first few lines of the Gemara outside, and then we'll read it inside. There's a few moving pieces, kind of above Metzia kind of stuff. Yaakov, whose property is now apparently Meshubah to his son's loan, then sells his property. Okay. Yaakov then dies. Okay. And we're saying that Ruvain can now collect the property from Levi, who bought the property from Yaakov. And maybe we're wondering why. That makes no sense. Why just because Yaakov died can Ruvain collect property that his father sold to Levi? Well, if you're wondering that, the Gemara is also wondering that. Also, we're about to see that it actually doesn't say anywhere that Yaakov actually sold this property. So basically, the Gemara is about to mention a case that is weird, and then we're going to try and explain it, and there's going to be lots of different ways to explain it, and while we explain it, we're going to bring back in our Mishnah. So there's quite a bit going on over here. Okay, with that, I don't know if you call it an intro, but with that confusion, let's get confused. But it's okay, because we're supposed to be confused for the first 3 lines. Shalchu mitam, they sent from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Ben, you have a son, Reuven, Shalava benichsei Aviv, who borrowed $1,000 from Shimon. Shimon is not Reuven's brother; it's just he's just a lender. So Reuven borrows. Where am I? Shalchu mitam Ben Shalava benichsei Aviv. So Reuven borrows $1,000 from Shimon, and he, as a guarantee, he is mishabed his father's property. B'chai Aviv, while his father's alive, umeis, and then Yaakov dies. Now, okay, Yaakov dies. Okay, Bino motzim yad alekuchis. Now Reuven can take the property away from Levi, who apparently bought the property from Yaakov. V'zoi shekashu b'dinei mamanis, and this is a halacha by dinei mamanis, by monetary laws, by financial laws that has problems with it. There are questions on it. So now, affect the Gemara. Lava my mapik. This doesn't make any sense. If Reuven borrowed money from Shimon, why does that allow him to take property away from Levi? Also, it didn't say anywhere that Yaakov actually sold the property to Levi. So, first of all, it doesn't say that Yaakov actually sold the property to Levi, but apparently I guess he did. And even if Yaakov did sell the property to Levi, why does the fact that Reuven borrowed money from Shimon and using Yaakov's property as a guarantee, which Yaakov then sold it to Levi, and then Yaakov dies, why does that allow Reuven to automatically take that property back? Like, why? So, Ella, rather, Yitmar, Yitmar. Rather, okay, yeah. For the reasons why we're confused, the Gemara says, yeah, let's make this unconfusing. And rather, this is how you'll have to explain it. Ben Shemacher, Benichsei, Aviv, B'chai, Aviv. Okay. So if you have so you have Yaakov, and Yaakov has property, okay, and he has a son Reuven, okay. Reuven sells his future right to Yaakov's estate to shall we call him Levi? Should we call him Shimon? What should we call him? Should we call him Levi? Why not? Let's call him Levi just to be consistent with the what we said a few minutes ago, where Levi's this kind of buyer. Okay. So Yaakov has property. Now, potentially, if Yaakov dies, so then Reuven would inherit that property. Okay. Reuven, while Yaakov is still alive, sells the property to Levi. Reuven then dies. Interesting. Which means that Reuven actually never inherited the property from Yaakov. If Yaakov would have died, fine, okay, Memele, so then Reuven would inherit Yaakov, and sure, the sale would be valid to Levi. But Yaakov didn't die, Reuven died. Which means that Reuven died without ever having inherited Yaakov's property. Which means that what he sold to Levi was never his to sell. But now what happens? What happens is Yaakov dies. So where does Yaakov's estate go to? His grandson. What was his name again? Chanoch. His grandson Chanoch. Reuven's son Chanoch. So now Chanoch inherits the property, okay? So Reuven had initially sold Yaakov's property to Levi. Reuven then died. Yaakov then died. Chanoch then ultimately got the estate. Levi comes to Chanoch and says, Chanoch, that's my property. I bought it from your father Reuven. Chanoch says, yeah, but I didn't inherit it from my father. I inherited it from my grandfather. My father never had anything to do with it. So here we go. So, Elimer Hachi Yitmar, top of Kufn and Tesam Aleph. It's going to be a long dive. It's already 10 minutes. And we're like, I'm telling you, it's going to be a lot of scenarios like this. I'm imagining it's going to be a long one. Okay, Hachi Yitmar. Ben Shemacher Benichse Aviv B'chaya Aviv. So if Reuven sells Yaakov's property, B'chai Aviv, when Yaakov is still alive, and he sells it to Levi, Umeis, and then Reuven dies. Beno, his son, Chanoch, Motzim Yada Lekuchis, he could take it away from Levi. Chanoch receives the property, not Levi. V'zoi shakosha b'dinei mamanos. And this is a halacha by dinei mamanos that Chanoch could take it away from Levi. That is problematic. Why? What's the problem? Well, v'leim rulei, why doesn't Levi say to Chanoch, Avuch mizabin v'ata mapik? How can it be that your father sold me a property, and that your father sold me a property, and you're simply taking it away from me? How could that be? That's the problem with this halacha, because the halacha is that Chanoch could take it away from Levi. But the problem is, shouldn't Levi be able to argue that your father sold it to me? Why can you just take it? That's the problem with this halacha. But umay kusha, why is that really a problem? I can argue that, of course, Chanoch can take it. Dilma Matzi Omar, maybe Chanoch could say to Levi, of course I'm taking it from you. Mikoch avua de'aba ka'asino. I'm not inheriting it from my father. My father actually never had any right to this property because he sold it when my grandfather Yaakov was still alive. It wasn't his at the time that he sold it to you, Levi, and he then died and never inherited it. And I, Chanoch, am inheriting it directly from my grandfather, not from my father. Therefore, unfortunately for you, Levi, you bought it from my father. My father never had anything to do with this property officially. Teda, and you should know this because the pasuk says, "Tachas avosecha yu banecha." That it's as if the pasuk is talking to Reuven, and it says, "Tachas avosecha," right? From your in place of your father Yaakov, yu banecha will be your children, Chanoch. Meaning, Chanoch will inherit Yaakov directly. Tasim l'sarim b'chol haaretz. This goes to Tzionim says you could technically even leave out these words, but it's a continuation of the pasuk that they will be Tashisim l'sarim b'chol haaretz, that they will be officers in the land. Okay, so we wanted to say that this scenario that is problematic, and basically for the rest of the Amud we're going to be trying to figure out what is this problematic scenario, right? That there's this halacha that what is this? What was it? V'zoi shakasha b'dinei mamanis. Right, that there's this certain halacha in dinei mamanis that is problematic. That is the halacha, but has its problems. We wanted to say that this halacha that has its problems is this scenario where Reuven sold the property to Levi when it wasn't his, and then he died, and then Yaakov died, and Chanoch takes it from Levi. That's the halacha, but it's problematic. We said, but it's really not problematic because he inherited directly from Yaakov. Okay, so then what is the halacha that is problematic? Okay. Ella, rather, ikasha ha-kasha. This is the halacha that is problematic. Ben Bechor shemachar chelek bechora b'chaye aviv. Well, what if Reuven inherited his right to the bechora, right? So let's say Reuven is a firstborn, okay? So let's say, there's Reuven and Shimon, okay? Let's say there's Reuven and Shimon. It says Reuven, right? Yaakov has two children, Reuven and Shimon. Levi is not related. So Yaakov has two children, Reuven and Shimon. Now, when Yaakov dies, Reuven, as the Bechor, would get twice as much as Shimon. So basically they would divide the property three ways. Shimon would get one portion, Reuven would get another portion, and the final portion would be the portion of the Bechorah that would also go to Reuven. Now, Reuven sells that portion to Levi, who is not related. He's just a random guy, Levi. So Reuven, while Yaakov Avinu is still alive, sells his Bechorah to Levi. This basically a third of the estate. So again, Ben Bechor, Reuven, Shemachar Chelek Bechorah, who sold his right to the firstborn portion to Levi, B'chai Aviv, while his father Yaakov Avinu was still alive, Umeis B'chai Aviv, and then Reuven died. which means that he died while Yaakov Avinu was still alive, which means that he never actually was in possession of the Bechorah. He was never actually in possession of the Bechorah when he died. Now, Beno, then when Yaakov Avinu subsequently dies, and as we learned from the Beno Tzlafchad, what would happen is Shimon, right, Yaakov's son Shimon would get 1/3 of the estate, and then the other 2/3 of the estate would go to Chanoch, because instead of going to Ruvain, they would go to Chanoch, Ruvain's son, since Ruvain's dead. And Chanoch can therefore, right, so Chanoch now receives both portions, right, the portion, right, basically 2/3 of Yaakov's estate, 1/3 as the inheritance that would be shaykh to his father Ruvain, and the other third as the Bechorah. Chanoch gets both of them. And this is the halacha that Chanoch receives both portions. This is the halacha that is problematic, because avua mezabin I mapik, because how could it be that Ruvain sold the right to his Bechorah to Levi and yet Chanoch takes it? How could that be? And if you're going to say Achanami, well, let's say the same thing over here. That I, Chanich, am receiving this directly from my grandfather, not from my father. And therefore you, Levi, don't have any right to it. That's why I'm getting both of it. But if that's the case, that Chanoch is not receiving his part of the estate from his father, but rather from his grandfather, then why does he have a right to the Bechelik Bechorah? He's not the Bechor. He's getting it directly from his grandfather, not from his father. So Umay Kusha, but that's not really such a good question. Dilma Matzi Omar, maybe Chanoch can say, Mikoch Avua de Abba Kasino, I'm inheriting from my grandfather, because my father's dead, I'm inheriting from my grandfather. However, Uvmakum of Ka'imno, but I am standing in place of my father, right? So meaning my father is dead. My father's not inheriting anything, he's dead. My grandfather now died. My grandfather had two children, Shimon and Reuven. Shimon gets, so now, basically Shimon and Reuven are inheriting directly from Yaakov. Now Reuven's dead, so in his place stands Chanoch to stand in for Reuven. So now it's Shimon and Chanoch are inheriting directly from Yaakov, but Chanoch is standing in for his father and inheriting directly from Yaakov in the same manner as Reuven would have inherited directly from Yaakov, i.e. the Yerusha as well as the Bechorah, but Reuven never received anything from Yaakov, of any part of the estate from Yaakov. Reuven's dead. So Chanoch is inheriting directly from Yaakov, and he's inheriting in place of his father, and he receives the same things that his father would have received, but Reuven never received anything, and therefore it's entirely valid for Chanoch to say to Levi, I know my father sold you his Bechorah, but he never had it. It was never his to sell, and I'm receiving it directly from Yaakov. You don't get anything. So again, okay, so we have an explanation for that halacha, why Chanoch gets it, not Levi. So once again, what is the scenario where we have a halacha by Dinei Mamonos that is irrational, or that we have problems with, and yet it is still the halacha? Elo ikasha ha kasha. Rather, what is this halacha by Dinei Mamonos that we have questions on? It is the following. Interesting. Reuven was a witness on a document. And at the time that he was a witness on the document, he was a kosher witness. He was he was a kosher witness. But then he stole. Then he did something that now he stole. He's now a gazlan. And as we're going to learn about Masechta Sanhedrin, we're already getting close to Masechta Sanhedrin. Al toshes yodchim rasha liosed chamos. Gemara says al toshis Rasha aid, that a shmendrik, a Rasha, cannot be a witness. So at the time that Reuven signed on the document, he was a kosher witness. However, subsequently he stole, thus becoming a Rasha, and a Rasha can no longer be a witness. So at the time that he signed the document, he was kosher. The thing is that now, let's say let's say the document was for Shimon, and Shimon wants to now use the document, and so we have to validate the document. How would you validate the document? Well, we'd say to Reuven, do you confirm that this is your signature? If he says yes, okay, he's validated his signature, but we can't trust him anymore. So while at the time that he signed it, he was a kosher aid, and therefore the document is a kosher document, but how are you going to validate it? Because to validate it, you need Reuven to say, yes, that's my signature, but he can no longer be trusted to do that because now he's a Rasha. So again, Ela Ikasha Akasha Hayodea Lo Edus Bishtar Achelo Naisa Gazlan. If Reuven was a witness on a document before he was a Gazlan, Vinaisa Gazlan, and then he became a Gazlan, and now we need to validate the star, but he can't do it because he's a Rasha now. Hu enomeid al ksav yodo, so he of course cannot testify about his ksav yodo. Aval acheir meidin, but others can testify and say, yeah, we recognize that signature. That signature, that is Reuven's signature. So if others can validate his signature for him, and again, at the time that he signed it, right, there's a date in the document. It was before he stole. So we can validate the document that way. We can't trust him, but others can validate the document and say, yes, that's his signature. And then, okay, maybe it's a kosher document because at the time that he signed it, he was still a kosher aid. But here's the problem with that. The problem with that, and here's why that is the halacha, but we have a question on it, is because hashta iu lo meheimin, achrine meheimne. What doesn't make sense here is that he, the primary source, he himself is not trusted, and yet acher memne, we trust a secondary source to prove his signature. We don't trust him, but we trust others. Right? We're favoring a secondary source over a primary source. That's what's kind of weird about it, and yet it's the halacha. And this is this thing that is, and this is where am I? And this is the problem. This is this halacha that we have a question on. That how could it be that he is not trusted, but others we could trust to validate his signature? That we favor secondary source over primary source. My kusha, but why is that necessarily a question? Because I could say, you know what it's talking about? What if prior to Reuven being a Rasha, prior to him stealing, he signed this document, and then Bezdin validated it, right? They did Kiyum Shtaris, they wrote a handpick. Bezdin validated it, and they wrote, this is a valid star, right? Reuven, right, the witnesses were here, we validated that it's them, it's a valid star, and the judges, I believe it's the judges, sign off on it. Well, they have now validated the star, so what we could say is that it's not that we're getting somebody else to come and say, yes, that's Reuven's signature. That was already done a while ago, before he even stole. After the document was written, before Reuven stole, Bezdin validated the star. They wrote an addendum to the document saying, yes, we validated that this is a valid document. It can be relied upon, it can be trusted. So now, when if it's the documents for Shimon and we want to collect with it, so I assume it's the Bezdin, right? Those who signed the this addendum come and say, yes, this is yes, we signed this addendum. So basically, they're validating the star without requiring him to be part of the validation process, because we're relying on the addendum, not on his signature. His signature was validated before he even stole, when the addendum was written. And therefore, what we're saying is he can't testify about his own signature, but others can testify about this document that he had signed on, that it was valid. So therefore, again, the question isn't really such a great question, because the whole question was, how could it be that we don't trust him but we trust others? The thing is that it could be that we're not talking about trusting others about his signature, we're talking about trusting others about the addendum. Eli kasha ha kasha. Okay, rather the halacha that we have questions on is the following. If Reuven testified about, if Reuven signed on a document regarding a particular property, Reuven signed on a document regarding a particular property. At the time that he signed the document, he did not own that property. Though it turns out that the property did belong to a cousin of his or something. The cousin then died, and there were no. He ended up being the closest relative. He actually ended up inheriting that property. So at the time that he signed a document regarding that property, it was not his property. It did, however, subsequently become his property. And now we need to validate the document, but he can't testify about his own signature regarding his own property anymore. So he cannot validate his own signature. But others can validate his signature for him. And now basically, right, Dagosa Bach adds, basically now we have the same question. Right, Dagosa Bach adds, right? So be'etzem, and now we have the same question. How could it be that the primary source, is not trusted, but others can testify about his signature? Umay kusha. Why is this a good question? I mean, you could say the same thing over here as well, that we could be talking about a scenario where a Bezdin did Kiyum Shtaris, and there was a handpick, and we're not actually testifying about his signature, we're testifying about the validity of the addendum. Okay. Fine. So therefore there's no problem with that halacha. There's no question on that halacha. Ella, ikasha ha kasha. Rather, the following is the halacha that we have questions on. Reuven signed on Shimon's document, and at the time that Reuven signed Shimon's document, there was no relation between them. However, subsequently, Reuven married Shimon's daughter. Reuven is now Shimon's son-in-law. So he signed the document when he was not his son-in-law, and therefore he was a valid witness. But V'naisa Chasano, now he's his son-in-law. He cannot validate the document anymore because he's a relative. Hu eno meir al ksav yodo avalachem idin. That Reuven cannot testify about his own signature, but others can testify about his signature. So now, fact the Gemara, but hulo mehemen achrini mehemne. But how could it be that he's not believed, and yet others are believed about him? That's the question. Maybe you'll try to use the same answer that we used in the two previous cases, that, well, maybe it's talking about a situation where there was already Kiyum Shtaros in Bezdin. So he doesn't need to testify about his own signature, we're just testifying about the addendum, that it's valid. But the problem is that says Rav Yossi Bar Manyomi, Rav Yossi Bar Manyomi Amar Rav Nachman, Afal Pisha Lo Uchzak Sav Yodu Bebezdin. That we say that this is relevant even if there was no prior Kiyum Shtaros, even if his signature was not already validated in Bezdin, there was no addendum. Even so, we're saying Reuven cannot testify about his own signature, but others can testify about his signature. And the question is, how could it be that we don't trust the primary source, but we do trust the secondary source? That is what's weird about the halacha. But umay kusha, but still we say that still is not a question. Because the issue here is not that he's like a Rasha and that we don't trust him or anything. Right? What is it? Dilma gzeros melechi. De'ir lo meimen v'achrinim me'emnei. That maybe this is just simply a halacha from Hashem. It's a halacha that when you have a son-in-law and a father-in-law, the son-in-law cannot testify about his own signature because he's a relative, but others can testify about his signature. And And not because we don't trust Reuven, not because Reuven's a liar, nothing, it just happens to be that they're related now. He married his daughter. Because if you don't say this, Moshe v'Aharon l'chosnam. Mishum de lo mehemnehi. Who? What? If Moshe and Aharon had to testify about their father-in-law, right? Lo kam b'Yisrael k'Moshe od. Right? Right. So Moshe and Aharon are right, some of the greatest leaders of our people. They also wouldn't be able to testify about their father-in-law. What? Because we don't trust them? That's not why they can't testify about their father-in-law. Elo gzeras melechu. Rather, it's a halacha. That's what Hashem says. Shelo ya'idu loyim. That you can't testify for, right? Moshe and Aaron can't testify for their father-in-law. Hachanami, same thing applies here. Gzeras melechu. It's the gzera of Hashem. Shelo yoyid al ksav yado l'chosano. That Reuven cannot testify about his signature on his father-in-law's document. However, others can. And again, it's not because we don't trust him, but we trust others. It's simply, the halacha is you can't testify for your father-in-law, but others can testify about your signature. That's the halacha, and that is acceptable. So again, what is this halacha that we have a question on? Because even here, where we say that the son-in-law can testify about his own signature, but others can testify about his signature, we say, okay, it's fine, it's just a halacha. There's nothing irrational about that. So what is the scenario where we have a halacha that is irrational, that we have questions on? So rather, we go back to the original ukimta. Who could tell me what the original ukimta was? When Reuven, while his father Yaakov was still alive, Reuven sold his inheritance, sold Yaakov's estate to Levi. Reuven then died, Chanoch, and then Yaakov died, and then Chanoch inherited directly from Yaakov. Chanoch takes the estate from Levi. How come Chanoch could take the estate from Levi even though Reuven sold it to Levi? So we quoted this pasuk, Tachas avosecha yu banecha. Be'etzem, that Reuven, your son, Chanoch, will inherit directly from Yaakov. Reuven never inherited anything, and therefore he never had any way to sell, any actual way, legal right to sell anything to Levi. And therefore, Chanoch gets the estate, not Levi. And again, it was based on that pasuk of Tachas avosecha yu banecha, to say that Chanoch inherits directly from Yaakov, and therefore Levi has no right to the land. Now, it's talking about that ukimta meikara. And if you're going to say that, yeah, but what's the problem there? After all, we have the pasuk Tachas avosecha yu banecha. So of course Chanoch gets it and not Levi. Where am I? That pasuk in Tehillim is simply a blessing. That the pasuk says Tachas avosecha yu banecha tishisemo lisarim b'chol haaretz, that your children and their children will be leaders, will be officers in the land. It's a bracha. It's not a halacha of inheritance. It's just a bracha. But we don't actually have any real indication that a son would inherit directly, that Chanoch would inherit directly from Yaakov. And that is the question. So Levi says to Chanoch, hey, your father sold it to me. Chanoch is saying, no, it's mine, be'etzem. But why? We say that's the halacha. Sure, Chanoch keeps it, but why? We wanted to say because the pasuk of Tachas avosecha yu banecha. But now we're saying, no, that's just a bracha in Tehillim. It's not actually the halacha. Sorry, I gotta rub my nose. Sorry about. Okay. Alright. So now, frag the Gemara. When we motzis omart bebracha ksiv, but can you really say this? Can you say that pasuk is simply talking about a bracha, and the halacha is not that Chanoch directly inherits from Yaakov? But that's not the halacha. But what about our Mishnah? And Af Kufnun Zayin Umar Aleph. Nofal Abayis Olav Val Oviv Olav Val Morishav. If a house fell on Ruvain and his father Yaakov, or Ruvain and those who stand to bequeath to Ruvain, we're going to have to see who that is. Vaisa Olav Ksubas Isha, and Ruvain was married, and Ruvain was broke, and Ruvain was married, and he needs to pay a ksuba to his wife. Uvalchov, or Ruvain owed money to people. So now the shaila is, who died first? Right? If Ruvain died first, well then the creditor is out of luck, because Ruvain never inherited anything from either his father or from some Morishav, whoever is going to bequeath him. That could either be his uncle Esav, it could be his brother Shimon. But since he died first, he never got that. Or if his father or his bequeather died first, well then he inherited, in which case the creditor has from whom to collect. So again, so Nafal Abayis Olav Al Oviv Olav Al Morishav Vaisa Olav Ksubas Isha, and he has to pay. Ruvain's broke, and he has to pay a ksuba to his wife. He's dead now. His wife can collect a ksuba. Uvalchov, or there's a creditor. Yorshia of Omrim, the heirs of the father say, and we're going to have to see who the heir of the father is, but the heirs of the father say that Habein Meis Rishon, that Ruvain died first, and therefore he never inherited anything, and therefore the creditor is empty-handed. And then afterwards Yaakov died. Uvalchov Omer, whereas the creditor says, Ha'av Meis Rishon, no, Yaakov died first, and afterwards Reuven died, which means that Yaakov died first, Reuven inherited Yaakov, and then Reuven died, which means that the creditor can collect from Reuven's estate. My love, Yorshea of Bnei Morishav Ache. And we want to say that when the Mishnah is talking about Yorshea of, those who stand to inherit Yaakov, who is that? Chanuch. That Yaakov didn't have any other children. Wait, does that make any sense? Okay, yeah, that's fine. That's still fine. It doesn't actually matter. Okay, I don't think it matters. That's actually interesting. It doesn't actually matter though, I don't think. Okay, yeah, there's a lot of details here. But anyways, when we're talking about the Yorshei Av who say that Ruvain died first, that's talking about Chanuch. Because his father died and Yaakov died, which means that Chanuch stands to inherit the portion of Yaakov's estate that would have gone to his father. Okay? And Morishav, who's Morishav? Ache, it's Ruvain's brother, right? Right, because Ruvain's brother, in the event that there's no father, would bequeath to Ruvain. Okay? Right, Ruvain's brother Shimon, whatever, would bequeath to Ruvain, right? If Ruvain and Shimon were in that house, that could be the scenario. So now, but the important thing for here is saying that if we're saying that Chanuch is the one who stands to inherit, so basically what's the argument? So we're saying Yorshei Av, Yaakov's heirs, and we want to say that is Chanuch, is arguing that Ruvain died first. His father, Ruvain, died first. Chanuch's father, Ruvain, died first. And therefore Ruvain never inherited Yaakov. And then Yaakov died, which means that he, Chanuch, is going to inherit directly from Yaakov, and therefore the creditor has no claim to anything, because Ruvain was broke when he died and he never inherited anything from Yaakov. But if we would say that Yaakov died first, so then Ruvain would inherit Yaakov, and then Ruvain died, so only then Chanuch would inherit Ruvain, but the creditor would then be able to collect from Ruvain since he had inherited from Yaakov, or really now collect from Chanoch, the heir. So what do we see? So Chanoch is arguing that his father died first, and therefore his father never inherited anything. And then when Yaakov died right afterwards, Chanoch, inherited directly from Yaakov, cutting out the creditor, therefore the creditor has no claim. So we see in the Mishnah that the halacha is that a grandson, Chanoch, would inherit directly from Yaakov, thus cutting out any claims on his father Reuven, whether in this case it's a creditor or whether in the earlier case we were talking about, Reuven had sold his inheritance to Laban. So my love, Yarshe of B'nai, then when we're talking about the heirs of the father who are arguing that Reuven died first, that is Chanoch. Right? The heir of Yaakov is Chanoch, because if Reuven's dead, so then Chanoch is going to be inheriting Yaakov in place of his father. And Morishav, and when we're talking about it fell on Reuven and those who bequeath him, that's talking about his brother Shimon. Fine. V'isal kadaitech, and if it enters your mind, lo matzi omar, that Chanoch cannot say Mikoyach Avua Da'aba Ka'asina, that I am inheriting directly from my grandfather, from Yaakov. Because the pasuk of Tachas Avasecha Yubanecha is not talking about laws of inheritance, rather it's just talking about a bracha, that you're going to have all these great grandchildren. Meaning great grandchildren as in like awesome grandchildren, lots of them, and awesome ones. But if that's the case, that Chanoch does not inherit directly from Yaakov, well, if so, then even if Reuven were to die first and then Yaakov, what difference does it make? Because if Chanoch is not inheriting directly from Yaakov, rather he's inheriting through his father Reuven, even when Reuven died first, so Neimalu Balchov, then the creditor should be able to say to Chanoch, Yerushas Avun Koshakilna, I am taking the inheritance that your father inherited because he owes it to me. So therefore it must be from the fact that Chanoch is saying that is arguing that Reuven died first, it must be because if Reuven died first, Chanoch will inherit directly from Yaakov, therefore denying the creditor any claim. Lo, no. Yoshia of, who are the heirs of Yaakov that are arguing that Reuven died first? Achiv. That is Reuven's brothers. Morishav, and those who would bequeath Reuven, Ache Davua, is Yaakov's brother Esav. So therefore, this has nothing to do with Chanoch. When we're talking about the Yosh Ben, when we're talking about Reuven's heirs, we're talking about his brother Shimon. When we're talking about he who stands to bequeath Reuven, we're talking about his uncle Esav, that if Yaakov was already dead and Esav dies, doesn't have his own kids, well then Memele Reuven would inherit from Esav. But we're not talking about Chanoch. Okay. Fine. Okay, Chevre, we're not done yet. We're not done yet. This next push is also going to require us to use our noggins. I don't know, brain might turn to mush. We might have to push through the mush. We'll have to see. It's a possibility. I'm not there yet. I might get there. Then after we have this next push, then the final bit of the Gemara is actually a Gemara that we've seen in Perek Chezkas Sabatim. It's not necessarily an easy Gemara, but it is a familiar Gemara. It should be familiar. Here we go. You got your Gemara, you got your Yevomis cup on? Here we go. B'aminim Rav Sheshes Yasuf Sheshes ben Mao sheyira shes imo bakever nahanchi la'achin min ha'av. Okay, so you have Yosef and Rachel. You have Yosef and Rachel. Okay, Yosef's father, Yaakov, is gestorben. Yaakov died and went to Wellwood. Okay. So Yaakov is gestorben. You have Rachel. Rachel's son is Yosef. Now Yosef has a brother, Reuven. Reuven's father is the same father as Yosef, Yaakov. Reuven's mother, however, is different than Yosef's mother. Yosef's mother is Rachel. Reuven's mother is Leah. So now, when Rachel dies, Yosef will inherit Rachel. Reuven will not, because Rachel is not Reuven's mother. Yosef will inherit Rachel. When Yosef dies, assuming he doesn't have any children, Reuven will inherit Yosef. So be'etzim, Rachel dies, her estate goes to Yosef. Yosef dies, the estate then is transferred to Reuven. What if Yosef is dead? What if Yosef is dead? If Yosef is dead, so then when Rachel dies, does Yosef still inherit Rachel's estate even when he's dead, which would therefore Memele transfer it to Reuven? So is Yosef able to inherit his mother even when he's dead, with sort of the sole purpose of that being that the estate would then be transferred on to Reuven, who shares a father with him, though a different mother, or not, in which case, let's say Rachel's father, Besuel, would inherit, assuming he's Jewish, whatever, would inherit her estate. So that's the question that they asked Rachel. I think I hear some noise coming from outside through my noise canceling headphones, but it's not enough. I don't think, at least at this point, that it's enough to cause any trouble for us. Okay. So they ask of Sheshes, Ben Ma'ushayirash es imo bakever, can a son inherit his mother when he's already dead? Can Yosef inherit Rachel if he's already dead? Lehanchil la'achin min ha'av, with the purpose being to forward on, to pass on the inheritance to Reuven. Amlu Rav Sheshes, Rav Sheshes responds to Nisua that we have a very complicated brisa that should answer this. Ha'av shenishba umeiz beno ba'medina. If Yaakov was taken captive, never to be seen again. Never to be seen again. So he's out of the picture. Umeiz beno ba'medina, and then his son, I guess let's call him Yosef, dies. He dies. B'medina, at home, whatever, he dies. So now the thing is, Yaakov and Yosef are both dead, but Yaakov was taken away never to be seen again. Yosef is now dead. And we don't know who died first. Okay? So, or if it was the opposite, Uvention is, but if Yosef was taken captive, Meis Aviv B'Medina, and then his father dies. So now what do we do? We don't know who died first. Whoever was taken away was never to be seen again. The other one died. We don't know who died first. So therefore, who gets what? Yoshia Yoshia ben Yachloku. So the heirs of Yaakov and the heirs of Yosef divide up I guess Yaakov's estate. Fine. Now, hey Chidami, what's the scenario? If it's as we just explained, hey Ninu Yoshia Abe, hey Ninu Yoshia ben, who are the heirs of the father? Who are the heirs of the son? Those must be the same people. Let's look at the Rashbam again. It's a little, I think it's a short Rashbam. Is it a short Rashbam? I think it is. Yeah. Hey Ninu Yoshia Av v'chulei. It's towards the end of the thin lines. V'alo im ein lo banim lo la'av lo lebein. If Yaakov has no other children and Yosef has no other children, krovei av yoshin es shneim. Well then, if Yosef has no children and no brothers, so then what happens with Yaakov's estate? Well then it would go to, Esav. Oh, im yesh banim lo oso bain, or alternatively, if Yosef has a son, So arei ein yorshin es ha'av ve'es haben. Well then, the son would just inherit both of them, right? Because Yaakov would bequeath to Yosef, who would go to his son. So assuming that that's the scenario, either that Yaakov has no other sons and Yosef has no, right? Yaakov has no other children, Yosef has no other children, in which case Esav would get everything. Or if Yosef had a son, so then Yosef's son would get everything. So then, who's splitting anything? Everything's just going to the same person. Okay. Elo lav achikama. Rather, this is what it's saying. Okay. This gets a little bit tricky because the only way that I thought to explain it is in a tricky way, but okay, whatever. We'll get there in just a second. Av shenishba. Okay, so if Yaakov was taken captive, umeis ben bito ba Medina, and then his grandson, the son of his daughter, died in the Medina. Uven shenishba, or if let's say Yosef was taken captive, umeis avi imo, and his grandfather, right, the mother of his father, died by Medina. We don't know who died first. So the reason why this is confusing, other than it simply being confusing, is that I'm going to have to use names. Do I have to? I don't know. I'm going to use names that are not in the roles that we know them traditionally in from the Chumash, right? Of course, Rachel was Yaakov's wife, not Yaakov's daughter. However, for this scenario, I'm going to assume that Rachel was Yaakov's daughter, and then Rachel had a son, Yosef, and Yosef had a brother, Reuven, who shared a same father, but a different mother. Okay, so Rachel was married to some guy without a name, and she had a co-wife, Leah. Okay, Rachel's son was Yosef, Leah's son was Reuven, and they were both married to some guy who's now dead. Now, and their grandfather is Yaakov. Okay, so that's the scenario. Instead of Rachel and Leah being married to Yaakov, Rachel and Leah are Yaakov's. Rachel is Yaakov's daughter. Rachel and Leah are married to some guy, right? Leah is not Yaakov's daughter in this scenario. Okay, Yaakov has a daughter, Rachel. Rachel has a son, Yosef, and Rachel is married to some dude who's also married to somebody named Leah. Leah has a son, Reuven. Reuven and Yosef have the same father, this guy. Okay? That's the scenario. It's not super complicated, but it's complicated mostly because the roles are slightly different than we know them from the Chumash. Fine. Again, we don't know who died first. Did Yosef die first? Did Yaakov die first? So now, okay, fine. So Yorshe Ha'av v'Yorshe Haben Yachloku. So the heirs of the father and the heirs of the son. So the heirs of the son would be Reuven, and the heirs of, one second, and I think we're talking about, and is Rachel also dead? Wait, 1 second. Okay, so where are we? So Yoshe Ab Yoshe ben Yachlokus. We say that the heirs of Yaakov and the heirs of Yosef will split it. Who's the heir of Yaakov? His brother Esav. Who's the heir of Yosef? His brother Reuven. Reuven and Esav split it. Now here's the thing though. If we say that a son inherits his mother even in the grave in order to pass on the inheritance, well then, right, assuming that Rachel's dead, I guess, alright, yeah, of course she's dead, right, because otherwise she would inherit her father, yeah. But anyways, okay, so Rachel's also dead. So now here's the thing, right, what's the whole thing is that we don't know who died first. Did Yosef die first? Did his grandfather Yaakov die first? We don't know. But if we say that Yosef inherits Rachel even when he's dead in order to pass it on to his brother Reuven, well then either way, why is Reuven splitting anything with Esav? Reuven should simply get everything. How come? Well, if Yaakov died first, well then his daughter Rachel would inherit him. And since Rachel's dead, so Yosef inherits Yaakov. And then when Yosef dies, his brother Reuven would get the estate. Now, what if Yosef would have died first? Okay, so then Yaakov has his entire estate. Then Yaakov dies, but what would happen? The Yaakov's estate would go to his daughter Rachel, but she's dead. It would then go to her son Yosef. He's dead, so then it would go to Yosef's brother Reuven. Either way, Reuven would get everything, right? If Yaakov died first, well then Yosef would inherit Yaakov, then Yosef would die and it would go to Reuven. If Yosef died first, well then when Yaakov dies, it would go to Rachel, dead Yosef, and then to Reuven. So from the fact that we're saying that Reuven and Esav split it, it must mean that a son does not inherit his mother when he's already dead to pass it on to his relatives. Right, so again, I don't know if, again, but Vim Isa, second wide line, Vim Isa, if so, that a child inherits his mother when he's already dead in order to pass it on to his relative, his heir, so Nihinami de ben meis bereisha, even if Yosef were to have died first, who cares? Liyarse le'arvua de'ime bekivrei, Yosef should be able to inherit his grandfather, from his grave, and be able to then pass it on to Reuven. Elalav, rather from the fact that we're saying that Reuven and Esav split it because we don't know who died first, Shmamina, we must see from here, Ein aben yorish es imo bakever, that a son does not inherit his mother when he's already dead, lahan chilach me'av, in order to then pass it on to his brother, Reuven. Rav Acha bar Manyomi l'Abaye, Rav Acha bar Manyomi says to Abaye, Afananami Tanina. We also have a Mishnah that proves this. Nofel Abayis Olav Val Imo, that if a house falls upon Yosef and his mother Rachel, Elu ve'elu modim, everybody agrees sheyachloku that it is divided between Yosef's heirs and Rachel's heirs. Vim Isa, and if it were so that the inheritance would be passed on to Reuven, Ninami de ben meis bereisha, even if Yosef were to have died first, Lerse liime bekivrei, he should inherit his mother Rachel from his grave. Velersu inu la'ache me'avua, and pass it on to his brothers, right? Pass it on to Reuven. Elav shmamina, rather from the fact that we're saying that Yosef's heirs and Rachel's heirs split it. Eina ben yorish esima bakever lan chilach mina'av shmamina. So rather we see that a son does not inherit his mother in the grave to pass it on to his brothers. V'taima mai, how come? Amar Bais is a pasuk. Nemra, we've seen this in Yesh Nochalin. Nemra siva beben v'nemra siva bebal. That it says, right, the word of hasova, that like the estate will go by it says this word of siva, by a son as well as by a husband. Masiva amur bebal eina ba yorish asishto bakever. Havsiva amur beben eina ben yorish asimo bakever lanchilachim na'av. Slightly different with relation to the father and the son, but same concept, which is a father, of course, a husband inherits his wife, right? When a wife dies, the husband inherits her. Now, what he inherits, though, is only what she had at the time that she died. Whatever property she had at the time that she died would go to the husband. However, once she dies, if her father is still alive and then her father dies, the husband does not get what would have been coming to the mother, rather her son would inherit that, right? So just like the husband does not stand to inherit what his wife would get once she's already dead, so here also a mother does not bequeath to her son when he's already dead to pass it on to his brothers. Okay, fine. Okay, this was a Gemara from Chezkas Habatim, perhaps you remember it. Shimon has a whole portfolio of properties. In this portfolio, he owns a bunch of properties that he purchased from Mr. Hilton. In our example, he's called Mr. Barsisen. Okay, but to make it relatable, he's bought a lot of properties from Mr. Hilton. And Shimon says to Reuven, Reuven, all of the properties in my portfolio that I have purchased from Mr. Hilton, I'm selling to you. Reuven says, Givaldik. And he goes to take those properties, and he shows up, and then he goes to take a particular property, it's a Hilton hotel, and Shimon says, no, I did not, this is a property that I own, that I did not buy from Mr. Hilton. It's called the Hilton Hotel. This is not a property that I bought from Mr. Hilton. And Reuven's now all kind of flustered, because like, wait, I thought that this property was included. You said everything that you bought from Mr. Hilton. I figured you must have bought this hotel from Mr. Hilton. It's a Hilton hotel. He says, no, I didn't buy it from Mr. Hilton. Okay. So Shimon says to Reuven, I'm selling you all of the properties that I purchased from Barsisen. There was a particular property that was called Barsisen. So Omerle halav dve Barsisen he. Shimon says, this particular property actually I did not buy from Mr. Barsisen. It just happens to be called that. I did not buy this from Mr. Hilton. It happens to be Hilton Hotel. I did not buy it from Mr. Hilton. It's excluded. Also, the case comes before Rav Nachman. Ukma biyada dilokeach. And Rav Nachman rules in favor of Reuven. In favor of Reuven. Rava the Rav Nachman. Rava says to Rav Nachman, Dina achi, is this really the case? Or maybe it's a statement. This is the case. That somebody who's extracting from his friend, the burden of proof is on him. If Reuven is taking these properties from Shimon, right? It was Shimon's. Shimon was the original owner. So the burden of proof is on Reuven. I hope that I just said this right. Right, exactly. Meaning Rav Nachman ruled in favor of Reuven, i.e., according to Rav Nachman, the burden of proof is on Shimon, and according to Rava, the burden of proof is on Reuven. Okay. Now, where are we? But one second. I would argue that Rava is inconsistent, and that Rav Nachman is also inconsistent. How so? There was a scenario where Shimon comes to Reuven and says, what are you doing on my property, in my house? Reuven says to Shimon, I bought it from you, and I've been here for 3 years. Shimon says to Reuven, Ma pitom, I was living that entire time in the inner house, and all the time I would go out to the outer house where you were, and we would schmooze, we would work together. I mean, I never thought to be ma'ar, because I thought it was so obvious that it was my property and it's not your property. I was there the whole time. Also, the comment of Nachman, they came before Rav Nachman, Amar le zilbra achilascha, and Rav Nachman ruled that Reuven needs to prove that it is, in fact, his. Amar le Rava, and Rava says to Rav Nachman, Dina achi, hamotzim chaveru olav araya. What about hamotzim chaveru olav araya? If Shimon is extracting it from Reuven, the burden of proof should be on Shimon. So now, to understand the question, in both cases, Shimon is the original owner, and Reuven is the new owner. In the first case, Shimon was the original owner with his portfolio of properties, and Reuven is the new owner buying those properties from Shimon. In the second case, Shimon was the original owner of the property. Reuven is the one who's now claiming that he has a chazakah. Now, in the first case, Rav Nachman says that the burden of proof is on Shimon, and Rava says that the burden of proof is on Reuven. And in the second case, it's fakert. Rav Nachman says that the burden of proof is on Reuven, and Rava says that the burden of proof is on Shimon. So they seem to be backwards. Kasha d'Rava v'Rav Nachman d'Rav Nachman. Rava is contradicting himself. First he says that the burden of proof is on Reuven, then he says the burden of proof is on Shimon. And Rav Nachman is contradicting himself. First he says the burden of proof is on Shimon, and then he says the burden of proof is on Reuven. I hope I got that right. D'Rava lo kasha. Rava is not a problem. He's actually consistent. In both cases, he says Motzi mechaveru olav arai. In the first case, Shimon, the original owner, had all the properties. Therefore, the burden of proof is on Reuven to extract them from Shimon. In the second case, it's Reuven who's actually on the property now, and therefore Shimon, the original owner, is extracting it from Reuven, so the burden of proof is on him. Hacha, in the case of the hotels, mocher koi benichse. Right? Shimon has the portfolio. Reuven is trying to extract it from him. Whereas Hassam, in the other case, with the chazaka, lokeach koi benichse. It's actually Reuven who now is on the property, and Shimon is trying to extract it from Reuven. Rav Nachman lo kasha. Also, Rav Nachman does not contradict himself. Hacha, in the case of the portfolio, kevin do amr le devei bar sisin umekayir devei bar sisin. The burden of proof is on Shimon because since Shimon says to Reuven, I'm selling you all of my properties that I purchased from Mr. Hilton, and this hotel is called the Hilton Hotel. So all I did well, then the burden of proof is on Shimon to prove that in fact this property should be excluded from the sale. Because by default, I would assume that a Hilton Hotel is included in all the properties that he purchased from Mr. Hilton. So the burden of proof is on him. But in the case of the chazaka, a chazaka, as we learned in Chezkas Sabatim, it's nice all the way at the end of the Masechta. We're about to start the last parak of the Masechta to go way back to Daf Lamed. That's 130 daf ago, 129 daf ago. Crazy. And so we learned in Perek Chezkas Sabatim that the reason why a chazaka works is because we can't assume that a person is going to hold on to a document forever and ever and ever, and that if he loses it, then he's stuck. So we say at a certain point, the chazaka is in lieu of the document. Now, if he had a document, Shimon can say, okay, Reuven, I want you to validate that document. So here also, Reuven makes a claim that I have a chazaka. Shimon can say, okay, get witnesses and validate your chazaka, prove your chazaka. So therefore the burden of proof is on Reuven, in this case according to Rav Nachman, and therefore it is no contradiction. They're both sort of, you can explain how both of them are consistent in their rulings. Hadron Olach mi shemes. We'll come back to Perek mi shemes. Wow, what a daf! That must have been about an hour, maybe even more. Wow. Okay, so first we talked about this halacha that doesn't really have a right there's something to the halacha, but there are problems with it, there are questions on it. We're trying to figure out what that was. We went through a whole slew of possibilities. It ended up getting back to this concept of a grandson inheriting directly from his father and us not having any kind of real proof for that. Then we got into the question of, does a son inherit his mother when he's already dead in order to pass it on to his brother? We say no. And then we got to this sugya that we've seen a long time ago about chazaka and what would be included in a sale. Peace out.